Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's session. I'm very excited for today's webinar. It's going to be the first of many, hopefully. Today we have 4 of our customers presenting on how they have automated their workflow and how they've created custom workflows for their different projects. I wanted to go through some of our upcoming iFormBuilder events. The first being, we do offer the iFormBuilder certification. We have this upcoming in March, and then the next one that we have will be on site in Herndon, Virginia before our Power User Summit. It'll be the 2 days prior to the Power User Summit. And so that is a great opportunity to come together and become certified in a face-to-face environment instead of the online certification that we offer normally. The other upcoming event that we have is our Power User Summit. And this is also in the Herndon, Ruston, Virginia area. This is a great time to learn from customers what they've built for their projects, some custom solutions that they've done, to learn from other individuals, but also to learn from the iFormBuilder team. So if possible, if you're here in the US, if you can make your way to our Power User Summit, it is free to enter, and we would love to have you there and to host you and learn more about what you're doing. The next thing I want to just cover with you is today's topic. So we have 4 different solutions that are going to be shown to you, but we're going to start by going through the Richford solution, which is Lucas, as well as Tom, who will be describing that. Then we have our Seymour White Group solution, where we have Mark will be presenting, and he'll have someone else on his team named Daniel, who will also be there to talk about the API side of things. Then we have Jacobs / Stronger Christchurch Infrastructure Rebuild Team Solution, and Iki will go into more of what he's built for that implementation. And the last one that we have is the Tetra Tech solution. The final thing that we're going to cover with you today is just I'm going to give you some links and some overview on using the iFormBuilder API if you haven't started it yet. So actually at this point what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand over some of the reins, and I'm going to allow Tom and Lucas to show off the Richford solution.
Right, yeah, hello. We're from Richford. I'm Tom, and I've got Lucas with me, my colleague. Hello. First I'll start with a little bit of an introduction to the business, who we are. Richford was established in 1977 by Stephen Richford in Cornwall, which is, if you want to know where that is, really, it's a little bit pointing out at the bottom of the UK, the land of the pasty. And they say that if you see a hole in the ground, the Cornishman is bound to be somewhere nearby. What we do. As a company, Richford specialise in damage limitation and restoration. We restore after fires, floods, and a variety of other incidents affecting private and public and commercial properties. And that's a bit about us.
Short and sweet.
Yes, short and sweet. Why we use iForms. I joined Richford a year ago, just over a year ago. The business has been expanding quite rapidly in the last year or so, and the IT systems were struggling to keep up. They were old systems, and at the time the idea was to develop the back office software as a web app, and to provide a bespoke Android application for our technicians to use. At the time, they were mainly using paper and telephone to convey information back to the office. We chose, the team that I joined was a team of 1, Lucas, and we would develop this in-house. Right, missing the way. Our motives were to remove the paper trail, to get away from an existing system that was unreliable. As it turned out, it was costing too much time and effort for the 2 of us to develop a web app, and support and develop our back office systems. We needed an alternative, something that would allow a rapid deployment and development procedure. When we found iForms, it did not take long for us to make the decision to use it. We could see it was flexible, allowed us to have a data flow through an API, and it also offers good support and continued development and improvement of the platform. That's why we chose it. Short the API. So why did we start with iForms? Our development in the beginning was somewhat organic. We had ideas, but we needed to learn both form building and using the API. Our ideas were, first of all, to use the API and create and update option lists. Then we were going to move to use them to collect submitted form data. Generally, the basic tasks that I think everybody using the API will probably want to do. But before that, we needed to generate the access token. Thankfully, the iFormBuilder website gives a good specification for it on the site, which is fairly easy to follow. And in addition, a search for JWT on the site will bring up some community shared examples. We are developing our interface in Java, and there's conveniently a community provided library for this that's linked to on the website. I found this a good way to learn by example, and if memory serves, it uses the Apache libraries for the base 64 encoding. This can be done in native Java, and I decided to rewrite my own class using native Java. I missed that bit of the slide. And that one. Right. Yep. Our first project was to develop a simple timesheet collecting app, or form rather. With the tokens taken care of, we were able to produce our option lists, and what we wanted was a list of stuff to be updated as new stuff added to our system, and to be able to segment that into categories and departments. This allowed that we had have a static list for the departments and a dynamic list that we update through the API for the staff. The second need was for a list of the projects that are current in the business. This will allow the staff to associate their timesheets with the various projects that they're attending. This has to be updated regularly. Part of this is when new work comes in, we have to update it, and also when the diary is finalised at the end of one day, we can update a category on the timesheets which covers an easy to find way of all the projects that are due a visit the following day. We also had a fairly static big list of activities of what people would do when they visit these projects. Collection and validation and the integration with our own data was the next step to tackle with the API. I'm not a very good JavaScript programmer, so much of the validation actually takes place once we collect the data, which we actually pull at periodic times from the iForms through the API. The validation mostly goes right, and it throws out emails to our admin staff to query when we've got issues with timesheets. Just finding my place again, sorry. That was our first project. After that, our next step, really, the effort was to implement a framework to make developing through the API a lot smoother and a lot faster. Developing forms is quite rapid through iForms, but integrating with the API, you need a I would say you need a framework in order to develop at an equally rapid pace. And we want to, as well, when we started, the API 6 hadn't arrived. And just before we started getting it to grips and understanding the API, the API 6 came out, and we took that as the opportunity. We'll use that as our target rather than the API 5. Right. After developing the framework, I think we are now at a stage where we are going to be pretty capable of deploying new forms fairly rapidly and support the data flow through the iForms API using our framework. What we want to do and what we're doing now, we are creating pre-filled forms for the with data that can be looked at, altered, responded to, and put directly back into our database to be used as a resource. We are creating several lookup tables as and when required from our database, and we can keep them up to date without having a member of staff go in there and laboriously update them. And we are collecting data through submission. We are both doing it through servlets now, and we are pulling it at periodic timescales. And soon we're hoping to implement a request service where we'll collect data, populate a form on demand, and we'll use an iForm form for the requests, and hopefully have the whole system automated. And we're going to do, in the future, more populated forms, more option lists, and more data collection. Ultimately, less paper, less phone calls, and less repeat entering of information. And that's it. Thank you.
All right, Tom, thank you, and thank you, Lucas, for going through that. And just a quick question for you. Was it because iFormBuilder offered API that you went with iFormBuilder as a solution, or was it just after the fact that you noticed that it had it?
It was a very big part of the decision, actually. When we discovered that there was an API, it was very interesting to us because a lot of other solutions offer cloud-based data storage and so on, and we rely on our databases. So yes, it was very important, yeah.
Great. And then if you had to give advice to someone who's considering to use the API, or they've just started, what advice would you give them?
Yeah, I'm a great believer in trying it out, experimenting and learning through using a system. I believe that the support through iForms, I've received support through the help desk, and it's been very helpful, very good, very on the ball. And so don't worry about asking questions. I use the online chat facility on the iForm site, and yeah, just go for it. And read some of the documentation and pick up the bits which you think you will need, and progress. And you'll find that the more you know about the API, the more useful and the more uses you can come up with of using it.
Great, and I'm just going to ask you one more question here, and that's really about the API itself. Now that you've configured this workflow, how often do you actually manually go into the iFormBuilder platform?
At the moment, we haven't got form assignment set up with our code. That's kind of a stage that we're coming on. Really, it's only to go in to do that, and maybe when we need to add or edit users.
So it's very limited on that sense. Everything else is automated except for that part.
Yeah, the idea is to get as much of it as we can automated, so that the admin staff in our office have got then just a familiar interface to look at the information, use the information with.
Well, I really appreciate your presentation today, and I'm sure everyone else on the call does as well. So thank you very much to both you and Lucas. And since it's getting later for you guys, I don't want to keep you up too long, but thank you very much.
Thank you, too. Goodbye. Bye.
All right, so the next presenter that we have Mark Shepard-Smith, and he's from the Seymour White Group.
All right, so I've got a bit of a slide deck to run through that gives an overview. I guess it's strongly guided by the structure that Barrett gave us. So hopefully it's I guess consistent, and you get what you need out of it. So yeah, I'll just run through a little bit about who Seymour White is, the project that we started a little over probably 18 months ago now. How we've used the API, and I guess some of the bumps and issues and learnings that we've had along the way. So Seymour White is an ASX-listed Australian construction company. We're about 300 staff across the country. Plus, obviously, being in construction, there's a lot of contractors and subcontractors. So, as a size of an organisation in turnover, around about $300 million a year. We've got offices spread across the country. Our head office, and where I'm presenting from, is in Brisbane. We've got offices in Sydney, Townsville, Melbourne and Perth as well. And we work across primarily in the transport sector, so roads and bridges, but we also work in resources and utilities, underground tunnelling and stuff like that. And I guess what differentiated Seymour White for me was really a strong systems vision around being fully integrated, fully mobile. So recognising that although construction is often slow to take up new technology, there's a kind of growing recognition that it's a differentiator in our industry. So we really had a bit of a license under our former CEO of taking that vision and running with it. So on to the project. I guess a little bit different to Tom and Lucas, we started with a very strong native iOS development capability. So we'd built a number of mobile apps, including a site diary, which I just got a screenshot of on this slide, as well as a quality management application that does ITPs and kind of field-based forms. Our HSE system, on the other hand, is a SQL-based forms application, so not as easy to port into that iOS platform. And we needed something that would deliver mobility to that platform, but also take the bottleneck out of our development team. So obviously, when you've got some internal development capability, there's a drive to sort of build everything. So we wanted to pull away from that a little bit and deliver something with a platform solution. So we went out looking at a number of platforms, and we got each of the companies to present to us, and we went through an evaluation process. And yeah, and iForm came out on top. Again, primarily, probably consistent with the last guys, is the ability to get the data in and out of it, and and certainly the flexibility with which you've got to design forms, I think, was a big sell as well. So that was kind of Q3, late Q3. We were doing that evaluation, and we were live with our first integrated forms by January 2015. So really was a very short turnaround in a development sense. Okay, so a little bit more about the, I guess our initial scope was built around 4 or 5 kind of common forms. So our weekly OHS inspections. This is a monster checklist. It was kind of printed out in paper previously, and it went over pages. I think it was some 190 odd questions in 29 sections. The iFormBuilder solution enabled us to break that up into chunks where you could just select the parts of the inspection that were relevant to you. iLeads, which are the kind of the safety conversations that our guys have on site. Hazard observations, which you're probably familiar with. SWIMs, or Safe Work Method Statement observations, are a review of how work is being done in the field. And importantly, action management. And we saw by making our action management database mobile and accessible from the field, we saw a 6-fold increase in the actions being collected. We added a few other forms later in 2015 around weekly vehicle inspections, environmental forms, and planned arrival, and I'll touch on those in a little bit more detail. So where does the API fit with all of this? Similar to the last guys, we started with populating option lists and doing things like segmenting option lists by project, managing user accounts as well. So when a new user is created in our safety database, we create the user in iForm. We generate a password, set that, our system emails that to the users. So they've got a fairly seamless authentication, kind of first authentication experience. The action management stuff is, we've used assigning forms to assign actions to people, and then we're collecting plant data and also pushing plant data lookup lists out to the devices. And receiving iLead conversation data into our databases. So let me just drill now into each of those in a little bit more detail. So option lists, I guess the 2 types of option lists that we're working with, the data lookups, so just a straight list, simple population, and also the conditional lookups, which is the segmented option list that I mentioned. So loading up the people and project relationships and the dependencies between them. One of the challenges that we came across, in fact it materialized just recently, was that because we're populating the option list dynamically, you must use the ZC display value to get the text of what the value was when the form was completed. Because the IDs of the forms change, even the record view in iFormBuilder will show kind of spurious values because it's driven off IDs, and the values attached to those IDs change. So the ZC display value is really, really important. So user accounts, as I said, users, we create them in our database, and we use the API to create those user accounts in PSEM with a random password, and that's sent out to the user to log in. We do still have to go through the manual step of assigning that user to the right groups within iFormBuilder so they see the forms that they're supposed to see. We did run into a bit of a challenge with this when iForm changed the password complexity requirements. So it went from kind of a simple password to 8 characters, complex characters, and capitals and things like that. So yeah, we just had to kind of adjust to that. Our action management process, I think we're kind of probably using iForm I guess to its potential here is actions are a common subform in our iForm setup. So they're called from lots of different parent forms, and they can be 2 or 3 levels deep in a form set. So basically, if there's something wrong in an inspection or an iLead or something, you'll generate an action to correct that situation. So that action data, as I said, is buried deep in a JSON packet. So rather than using the HTTP post process, which we've used in other forms, we actually use the fact that there's a post to trigger a query using the API back to that actions table. The actions table pulls data from just from in relation to actions, puts that into our SQL actions table. But then a second service takes data from that actions table and pushes it out to a different form, which we call assigned actions. And that assigned actions form is the one that's assigned to a user so that they see the action that they've been assigned within iForm with the details of the action required. You can see here's an example of that form there. They can then respond with closing the action, or they can reject that, which goes back to the person that created the action, or they can reassign that to someone else. So all of that kind of happens using the iForm logic. Once that action is closed, then we use, again, the API to push that back into the SQL database. Later in the year, we did a plant onboarding process. So this was our first experience with using lookup tables populated from the iForm, from our SQL database. So we had something like 5,000 pieces of plant, and we populate a lookup table, which is a concatenation of owner, plant type, and registration number, using the dynamic search in iForm that makes a very kind of easy to look up method of finding plant items that haven't previously been stickered. We've got a sticker that has QR codes in it, so that if a piece of plant comes in with a QR code sticker already on it, you can scan that, and then that will use the lookup table, which we also upload, to look up the plant data, so then you can record the inspection against it. So the last one is, before I jump into some of the challenges that we've had in this space, the last one is iLeads, which is the traditional HTTP listener. So because it's a top-level form, we're just listening for a JSON post, and that data goes straight into, populates into, so that should be PSEM, our HSC database. So what challenges have we faced? Initially, in the early days, we were using polling, time-based polling, and we set that a bit high, so we ended up with overage charges. So I'd suggest using trigger-based polling or the HTTP listener. So I think every couple of minutes, if you poll, then you'll hit the overage limits. One of the things that we still face and we're working with is a limit of 100 items per, if you like, parcel of data for uploading to option lists. So when we've got a 5,000 item option list, we're having to do 50 transactions to populate that. And again, working with large option lists, because they have to be downloaded in their entirety, that takes a long time, so we really limit the updating of that plant items option list. The lookup tables, on the other hand, will only download the new lookups. So we download new fields into that lookup table every time, but the option list, we do have to limit how often that's downloaded just because of the size of it. There's the old, we've got different people creating forms than Dan, who does the kind of API development for us. So sometimes users take it upon themselves to rename fields, which causes all sorts of havoc with our APIs. So that's probably a no-brainer, but it's worth saying. And we had some issues with missing headers in API posts. I think, Dan, you might have to talk to that one.
We had quite a few issues with, we had quite a bit of contact with the help desk to start with, because we would quite often have a header twice or a header missing, or the wrong post instead of put, things like that, and text encoding. So what we have to do still with one of our option lists is to download the existing one and replace its data and send it back. We still haven't figured out why that happens.
Yeah. Okay. So that's kind of our issues and challenges. But despite that, really the overall picture is we've overcome all those those little challenges, and the iForm solution adds an enormous amount of value to our processes, and does really speeds the process of form development and integration integration and mobilization of our existing SQL database. So Berit, if we can go to questions now.
Sure, that was great. I think it's really helpful for everyone to kind of see how you've been able to really customize this workflow with the API. And I've been fortunate enough to kind of see you guys through this process, working with you early on with the Kickstarts. But just a question quickly about, you mentioned that something silly that you have to talk to your users about the data column names and making data column names that don't match with your API. Have you built any kind of document that you share with your users so that they have a list of terms that they should use?
No. Well, there's only a few people that I guess one or two people that build forms, and we've trained them, shall we say.
Perfect. And then the other piece here is, what language were you using when you were using our API, and did you feel that there were enough resources in the iFormBuilder help desk to get you started with that?
So we use a .NET environment, but I leave the technical stuff up to Dan, so I might throw to him for an answer.
Yeah, no, there was lots of help available. The API docs are pretty translatable into any language, so it was, that was awesome. And the help desk, I think Penny was the lady we were dealing with, was fantastic.
Wonderful. Well, thank you both for that. There is another question coming in, and it's just, what's the reason for limiting the list upload packages to 50 items for the option list?
I think that's, now Tony might have a view on this, but my understanding is that there's, when you're uploading to an option list, you've got a limit of 100 items that you can upload at any one time into an option list. So when you've got a very big option list, you have to break your data into parcels of 100.
And Tony, do you want to mention anything else with that?
Yeah, no, it's a good point. So that is very much a true statement for the new version. I guess what I would suggest, if you want to take a look at it, is considering falling back to 5.1 for your option list requests, only because there's no limit there.
Okay,
that might be worth looking at. Thanks.
Yep.
And Tony, while we have you on here, people can use both intermittently, right? They don't have to just use 6.0 or just use the 5.0.
No, I mean again, it's kind of something probably everybody on this call will understand. The code we wrote a year ago will never be as good as the stuff that comes out today. So we support both versions. There are differences between the two. In some cases, this is something that hinders these guys, or not really hinders them, but forces them to make a number of requests to do the same thing that 5.1 would let you do in a single request. So yeah, I mean, you can certainly have the majority of your integration running on the latest, and then if you find there's advantages to using some older requests, certainly plug those in where they make sense.
Well, thank you, Tony, and a big thank you to our Seymour White group, Mark and Dan. That's been a great presentation. If you had to leave people with one piece of advice, if they're just getting started with building their automation, what do you think it would be?
Be persistent. No, actually, no, I'm going to say understand the process, understand the business problem that you're solving. I think the technical stuff works itself out. You know, there's always a solution, but it is really about understanding kind of why people are doing what they're doing to get the solution right.
Perfect. And I think that you hit the nail on the head with that. I think a lot of times when people jump into this, you know, they may not understand what their end goal is, or they may not even understand what their end users experience. And so building that workflow and building that process and understanding is definitely a key part of that. So thank you again. Moving on to our next presentation, we are jumping over to another Australian group. So we have Iki. And
all right. So my name is Iki Schäffler. I work for Jacobs in New Zealand. At the moment, I'm actually part of the SCIRT Alliance. SCIRT, that stands for Stronger Christchurch Infrastructure Rebuild Team. So SCIRT has been put together after the earthquakes that happened in 2011 in Christchurch that have destroyed vast parts of the city, as well as all the networks, underground networks, wastewater, stormwater, water supply, roads, bridges, etc. So it's just a few example pictures here. You can see on the map on the left-hand corner all the networks that have been affected or have been actually damaged during those earthquakes. So it makes up about 25% of the networks that need to be repaired and replaced over the time of SCIRT. About 750 kilometers of pipework, and we are estimating to have about 50,000 assets to be recorded that are being reconstructed or repaired over the time of SCIRT. So talking about SBolt, SBolt is really the data that we are collecting about those assets that have been constructed in the field. So that's, for example, a pipe, a manhole, whatever comes up. And what we need to record about those assets is, on the one hand side, of course, the spatial location where they are, and it goes back into our GIS system. But on the other hand, we also have a whole lot of attributes to record with every asset. So say for a manhole, you're recording the material, you're recording the size, the manufacturer, and so on. There's a whole lot of information that needs to be recorded. And for that purpose, we have developed over the time of SCIRT a guideline that clearly outlines the way how those assets have to be recorded. So it has clear instructions on what's the attributes to be recorded for a pipe, for a manhole, for a sump, whatever it is. And to make that attribute recording easier for the people who are out in the field, we thought iForm is probably a good solution. The challenge there was to set up a form that is made up of 61 forms on the iForm app with about 1,200 elements in it and around 600 pixels value still growing. So that's the point where we realized we can't do this manually, especially keeping it up to date and maintaining these forms. That needs to be automated, so we were looking for a solution where we can access the app through an API and actually set it up automatically. So this is the process how we use the iForm app at SCIRT at the moment, and that's really just a very simple overview of how we use it. You've got on the left-hand side there our schema, so that comes out of our guideline, which clearly defines what asset types do we have to record, what attributes has each asset type, what type of fields do we have, etc., and so on. There's all the options in the schema, so everything is practically organized in the schema, and whenever you need to change something on the app, whenever you need to change something on how we record our data in GIS, how we process our data, how the data gets mapped to other data sets, everything is actually recorded in that schema. So to actually then create the iForm app, we are using the API, and we are addressing the API through FME. I'm going to explain in a moment what FME is for those who've never used FME in the past. Then the user fills out the information, obviously, in the app, and that gets synced back to the iFormBuilder private database and gets posted to FME server, where it then gets written back into our native environment, into our database here. Before I carry on with the FME side, I will just quickly actually give you an idea of what our app looks like. So that's the app as we have it at the moment, and you can see that there's our survey form, and it lets you fill out the simple information that goes with the project, and then you can go into more detail here with all the different asset types. So, for example, if you go for a manhole, then you just select your manhole, and it lets you then provide all the information that's required for a manhole, for example. So back to the presentation. Really what I'm going to look at in this presentation, what I'm looking at in this presentation is really just that part, how we create the form. I'm not going to go into how we actually bring the data back into our database. So what is actually FME? Why do we use FME? FME is a piece of software. It's called Feature Manipulation Engine by Safe Software. You have to imagine it like a tool that lets you create a script through a graphical user interface. So you can put together a whole lot of, let's call it building blocks of script, which is really easy to maintain and easy for everyone who is not so good with scripting. So also for me, just starting with the API, it's been really easy to use FME and to run the API through FME. And the main piece here is actually one of those building blocks. They're also called transformers in FME, which is called the HTTP caller, with which you can address the API as well. So you can do your HTTP method. In this case here, you see it's the post method, and you've got your URL in here, and you can use variables in there. So as you probably all know, you need to put in your page ID, you need to put in your profile ID, etc. So that's a variable that comes out of the whole FME process, can be set as a parameter that the user can change, so that it's really easy to run the script and create your forms using that. And then, of course, you've got all the other settings that you need to set of your headers and your body, which goes in this JSON code. So the actual FME process, what does it actually do? So again, on the left-hand side, there's our schema, and it defines the different domains, so the different pick list values, they go into the option list, all the different asset types that we want to define in our form, and then the field and field types, and there's a whole lot of other information in there that I haven't listed here, but all that goes into the process. So it's the FME process just reads the schema, and that sits really just in our database. So FME reads hundreds of different formats. It doesn't really matter where you save it or how you save it. And there's probably no news to those who've created a form through the API already. You've got to create your option lists, and then you create your main page and your sub pages, and then you go about creating your elements on your sub page and creating your elements on your main page. And when you create your option list, it returns the IDs of the option list, of course. And you create your pages, and you get the IDs of your pages back, and that feeds back into creating then the elements for the sub page and the main page. And from all that process, I'm actually writing out a log, which makes it then easier for me to later on maintain the form, so I can easily go in and update the form by knowing what's that option list ID, etc. So that's all saved in the background as well. So just to give you a better idea of FME, I will just quickly switch over to FME, so you know what the process actually looks like. And that's really just a very quick overview. So you see it's a chain of all those transformers or building blocks in the script, and you can change that around, and you can change all the parameters of each one. So for example, you've got a tester, and the tester is nothing else but a conditional, so you can test for something and make something happen based on whatever happens. And so this is the thing. You then go through all these steps here. So this is creating the option list. I've called a pick list here. And further down, it creates the sub pages and the main pages. And then it creates further down here the elements. And when you run it, you can actually set a few parameters. So if I need to update my token, which I probably have to before I run it, I can put it in here, and a few things that I want to appear in my form. And very handy as well, I can actually run the whole thing just in test mode, which means it's not actually going out to the API. It's not making any change on my iFormBuilder. But I can actually see what would happen if I did run it like that. So I leave it now in test mode, and I just run it. It's just going to take a few seconds while FME runs through that thing. And you can actually watch it as it goes. And here you will see there's a number of things coming up. So it tells you how many records are going through there. And then now that I've run it in test mode, it's just opening up the table so I can check what would have happened if I put that up through the API. So that's really handy for testing, for a testing environment before you actually put it into production. So you see on my main page, I would have had all those parameters in there, and here's my option list, and they would look like this, like you can see on this table. So as I said, that's a really handy tool that makes it also very easy to maintain for anyone else who is not so good with scripting, because FME is actually quite easy to learn. So what's been the difficulties that we came across? There's a few things, especially when you're new to the API, that might make you wonder what's going on. And some errors just come up as a generic error. You don't even know exactly what is wrong with your script. So for example, in my case, I had a maximum number of forms set to my account by our admin. And so it was set to 60, but I actually had to upload 61. So in the last form, I got a generic error, but it didn't tell me what was wrong with it. And it took me a while to figure that one out. Or the other thing that happened was it returns an error if you use field names that are obviously not allowed in iFormBuilder. iFormBuilder, if you actually do it on the actual iFormBuilder control panel, then it tells you this field name is not allowed, so you can't use steps or name or whatever you want to use here. But if you do it, if you just run it up through the API, it's not going to give you that error. It just tells you generic. That went wrong, can't do it. And that's quite difficult then to figure out if you're not very good with these things, if you're not into that. So another example there is when you're referencing your option list. So if you want to pre-populate your fields with an option list value already, you've got to use the ID in those curly brackets. And if you don't do it, it still works, but just not for position 0 for whatever reason. So that's another thing that I got stuck with for a little moment. But again, the iFormBuilder support is really great. We hear that from Mark as well. I just got in touch through the chat, and it all got resolved really quickly there. Another thing that caused me a little bit of an issue there was the order of the list index of the option lists. So if I'm adding another option to my option list, I can either add it right to the end of it, and it's just getting the next ID up, or I can actually add it with an ID that I have already, if I wanted to get in the right order alphabetically, for example. But then it gets a bit messy because you're using duplicate IDs, and then it's just better to recreate the whole option list ID. So that's, I think, it's not ideal at the moment, or I might have missed something. I'll be happy to learn about a better solution there. It also took me a while to actually find out how you make a form accept a blank field. So if the field has a client validation against it, so you put in, you've got a number field and you say the number needs to be between 0 and 10, then the form always complains and saying, oh, you need to put in a number between 0 and 10 even if I leave the field blank. So it took me a while to actually understand that the field is undefined until you've actually touched it, so you need to include that into your JavaScript in your client validation there. A few other things like setting the keyboard type wasn't very greatly documented on the website. It only lists all the different types of keyboards, but actually not what the ID is of those ones, because you have to tell the API what the ID of the keyboard type is. Things like that, encoding JSON characters. When you create your JSON code, you need to make sure that all the special characters that JSON doesn't like straight out need to be encoded for JSON, otherwise it falls over. And one last thing is the token expires obviously after 1 hour. So you can include that into your script to refresh the token. And fortunately, my script, as I'm running it now, it finishes in 45 minutes, so that's all good. But whenever it runs a bit longer, then I need to think about how I can refresh the token there automatically. So just to keep that in mind as well. And my advice for beginners with the API, as I've shown you in our FME script here, just set yourself up so you can run it in a test mode without actually putting it straight up. So you can play around with it, you can see what's happening, you can see all the different parameters that would go up if you did run it. So you're not wasting time with deleting forms again, you're not wasting your API calls if you're limited with that, etc. And then you can just run it as a subset if you just want to run it quickly just to see what's happening and see it live on your iFormBuilder account. And then as well, it's very handy to record all those HTTP responses that you're getting back from iFormBuilder. So if something does go wrong, the debugging is really easy to be done. What's also really handy to do is use software like Postman or Fiddler to actually do some tests in case you're in doubt about what your script is doing. So you can do that manually and try out a few API calls that way. That really makes it easier if you're getting stuck somewhere. And the last thing is try FME. It really made it easy for me there. Right. Any questions?
Not so much right now. I think that was so helpful, and I think showing off a tool like FME, at least I know before you brought it to my attention, I was never aware of it, and that's a great way for people to kind of become more familiar with using API as well as our own API. The one thing I do want to mention is I just put into the chat box, we do have a help desk article on terms that you can't use that aren't database friendly. Now, I know that wouldn't help you because the error message doesn't appear, but maybe referencing that list could be assisting, could assist you when you're actually building out your forms. A big thank you to you. I mean, that was very, very helpful. I loved how you were able to give us an example of your workflow as well and what the users are experiencing on their device. So thank you very much for your time. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we jump to our next presenter?
That's all right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, up next we have Bill Spiking, and Bill is coming from Tetra Tech. And Bill, I'll let you take the reins now.
All right, thank you, Barrett. Can you all see my screen all right?
Yes, we can.
All right. So just a little bit about Tetra Tech. We were founded in 1966. Our corporate headquarters is in Pasadena, California. We've got 16,000 employees worldwide with a network of about 400 offices. And we've got approximately 57,000 projects in more than 100 countries in 2015. We're also publicly traded. Just a quick look at our office locations. We are worldwide with new offices popping up, I think most recently in South America. So what we do, I definitely cannot speak to everything that Tetra Tech does. This slide just gives gives you a general idea of where we're working with water, environment, infrastructure, resource management, energy, and international development. My focus is with the environment. And our team overall focuses our contracts with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. We have the Superfund Technical Assessment and Response Team contract, and with that contract, we're responsible for responding to emergencies in Region 4, 5, and 7. Those emergencies can be anything from oil and hazardous substance spills or releases to natural disasters like flooding and tornadoes and hurricanes. And we also do some site assessment work, environmental site assessment work in these regions, provide training and counter-terrorism support. Myself, I'm a GIS specialist that supports these regions. since it was New Year's Eve, I've been supporting US EPA Region 7 with the flooding in St. Louis, Missouri. And also in Region 5, we've got we're currently supporting US EPA Region 5 with the Flint water crisis. So just a few of the forms that we've developed for US EPA. We've got air monitoring forms, container inventory logs, facility assessment forms, which we use during the response to the flooding in Missouri. We were going to facilities within flood-impacted areas and verifying that they were operational or not operational, if they had issues or spills related to the flooding. And then we've got various forms related to environmental site assessment and emergency response work. As we collect this data using the iForm app, we're pushing this information up to our an ER dashboard. And what that dashboard allows us, it provides our regional managers, our operation managers, and headquarters with a real-time view of the data that we're collecting. And our ER dashboard just uses, it's an Esri JavaScript application, kind of fusing together multiple types of web mapping applications that provide these real-time numbers and real-time counts of what we're collecting out in the field. Part of our mission with the flooding in Missouri was to look for orphaned containers. That can be anything from a 50-gallon drum to a large propane tank. And once we've identified those targets, we've got our users out using the iForm app, collecting some information on that orphan container, taking a photo, and submitting that up to our SQL Server database on the cloud, which then updates our web mapping applications. So I was going to give just a quick demonstration of the workflows that we've established in Flint in support of US EPA's mission assignment there. So with our workflows, we use a lot of integrations with the Esri Collector app. And what this allows us to do is use our GIS as essentially a lookup table for our forms. So our folks that are out collecting water sampling data in Flint, the first thing they'll do is pull up the Esri Collector app. And then, of course, if I was actually in Flint, it would plot my location on the map. And I'll just zoom down to a location within Flint here. And so one of the challenges that our teams initially had, they were out with pen and paper, collecting ownership information about the home itself and the water infrastructure and whether the occupant had any health issues. And then they were doing water sampling at that location as well. So when they were out using the paper forms, they're filling out this survey and then collecting a GPS location. Well, as their data managers were pulling that information in, manually hand jamming it in a database, and pulling in those latitude and longitudes, and then mapping it, oftentimes their points were 4 blocks down the road, and the accuracy of their data just wasn't good. And the database itself, there was a lot of inconsistencies. So what they're doing now out in the field is they navigate through the city. They've got a list of properties that they need to visit, do this survey and water sampling. So they're using the Collector app to navigate around. And then once they get to a location, they click on the parcel within the Collector app. And then they can see some information on that property. They can see the parcel ID, address, ownership information. And then they also have the option to complete the water sampling form directly from iForm, or from the collector app calling up iForm. So I'll just click that link. And it's going to automatically launch iForm. What it has is it's passed that property information from the collector app into the iForm app. So you can see we're automatically passing the location ID, the latitude and longitude, the centroid of that parcel into the form, some ownership information, property type, and then the user goes through and just does the survey of the property. And then you can see it's automatically pulling in the property address, city, state, zip, and ownership information. So this is all information that our field teams don't have to complete in the field now. They need to verify it, make sure it's correct, but it's already pre-populated in the form, passed over from collector into the iForm. And then they go through and complete their water sampling form. So as this information is collected, it's like I mentioned, it's synced up to our ER dashboard, and the dashboard we have for Flint is very similar, where we're providing real-time counts of the properties that we've sampled, where we've been throughout the site. And then as this information's synced up, we also pull in, as the analytical data comes in from the lab, we merge that information up with the data that was collected with iForm. So before iFormBuilder, we used a lot of paper-based forms. We developed custom solutions. We used fillable PDFs, and we even tested these digital pins that didn't work that great. And the reason we chose iForm, we loved the form building interface. We felt like it was intuitive, and we could kick out forms pretty quickly, which for my group, being emergency responders, we needed to be able to develop and deploy these forms quickly. We love the responsive design for multiple device types and sizes, the nice portal for managing and visualizing our data, and the mobile client is easy to use. And the big thing for us, being a GIS shop, a GIS team, we like how we can integrate with the Esri products. And then, so Tetra Tech is huge, 16,000 employees. We now have 10 Tetra Tech operating units using our enterprise license, approximately 120 users, and that's growing every day. And our group is primarily GIS and data management pros. We've got multiple clients and projects, so it's what the 9 other operating units and how they're using the platform. I manage the license, but I let them manage their own projects, and so there could be other teams doing some pretty awesome stuff out there, and I wouldn't know it. But we use a SharePoint site for sharing lessons learned, developing help guides, and we've got a form library up there where we can share forms, the JSON code across operating units. We also share resources. Some operating units have more developer types that we can tap into, so we try to pull those folks in and share those resources across the operating units. And then we're also, from our SharePoint site, tracking our certified form builders. So as we have folks go through the iForm Builder certification program, we want to know who those folks are within Tetra Tech, so that we can align ourselves with those individuals. So where we struggle, I think right now our biggest struggle is reporting. We can quickly develop these nice mobile applications and share those and deliver those to our clients. But I think what our clients miss, both our internal and external clients miss, is understanding that reporting component. And do they really need a nice report ready deliverable, or is it really the data that they're after? So this part can be expensive at times, and I think that's where we struggle. And looking for the best tool as well. Do we want to develop a custom application? Do we want to use just the iFormBuilder platform, web merge, Google Docs, or basic Microsoft Office mail merges? So we've done it all, tested it all. It's just communicating that with your clients. So advice for teams getting started: get your team trained up. You don't want to be the only one developing or that has the know-how to develop these forms or implement these workflows. You can quickly become overwhelmed because once you get this out there and folks start using it, they're going to want more of it. So you definitely, I would recommend that you get everyone on your team trained up, and you all can have your own specialties, but it's important if you want to move forward together and be successful to make sure everyone's trained. So that's all I had. Any questions?
I think that was fantastic. I really appreciated you able to show us that demo. I know that Reflector, of course, being another software tool, can sometimes be hit or miss, but that was really helpful to see where you have been able to automate so much of the workflow on the data collection side and eliminate a lot of that error that I'm sure you could have if you didn't have that process in place. The other thing is I'm going to go ahead and take back presenter rights. If there are some questions, we do have the question chat box, and the presenters who are here will be happy to answer those questions. I do see that there is a hand up for a question, and we can get to that in just 1 minute. I just want to cover a few more things before we close today. And I really do appreciate everyone taking the time today and spending their afternoon or morning with us. This is just some of the support options we have available. I wanted to mention this. After today's call, we are going to be sending out, in the next 48 hours, we'll send out a link to a recording of today's session, but you'll also get PDF with the presentations from our groups that presented today, but also with information that I have here. So these are all clickable links that you can access to get more information on. The next thing is, if you're just getting started with the iFormBuilder API, what I've done for you here is I've kind of just given you a brief description of the API 6.0, but the top reasons for using our API, and I think you heard this from a lot of the folks today, one, to integrate data from multiple sources, also to redefine your workflow, and to have full task automation. You heard from some of these groups, they're almost at that point where they're never going into the Form Builder interface. Everything's being automated, and thus it's making their life so much easier, as well as a great user experience for those data collectors. What we have here is these are all different links to get started with our API. So some code samples, but also the 6.0, that is that newer one that was mentioned. And some additional configurations that I just want to note that we have is we just came out with the iFormBuilder SQL Server Data Pipe, or SQL Server Data Pipe. And what I've done for you here, this is a link to more information on what that SQL Server Data Pipe is. We also had a webinar in January that actually gave a demo of the SQL Server Data Pipe in a little bit more detail. So I'd urge you to take a look at that if you are using a SQL database and you're looking for an easier way to get your data in. Another thing is, if you're just getting started using iFormBuilder and maybe the custom workflows with the API is not quite where you are yet, the post data is another way to connect to other web services and to automate a lot of your workflow. The API is great because it allows for that bi-directional data flow, but the post data is one of those first steps so that you can immediately post record data into a web service of your choice. I've included a link to our Zerion iFormBuilder integrations. So Bill was able to show you that custom solution where you were able to bring in data and from their database and then bring it into iFormBuilder for the user, and how that can really save a lot of time. To learn how to do that, I have this link here to give you some more information. I also want you to be aware that we did have a data integrations webinar in December. And with that, we talked about Google integrations and other web services that you may want to connect with and start automating your workflow with. So just another big thank you to everybody who presented. In the next 48 hours, like I mentioned, you'll receive a recording of today's session. You'll also get a PDF from today, and you'll be invited to be a FormBuilder beta tester if that's something that you're interested in. All right. Well, thank you again, everybody, for taking time out of your schedule, and a big round of applause to all of our presenters. I think it was fantastic to be able to show what you've been able to do, and hopefully those individuals who haven't yet started using the API now feel like they have a better idea of how they want to do it, and feel like they have the right resources to be able to do it effectively. So have a good rest of your day, everybody, and thank you again.